Hi and welcome to the Allplane Podcast, where I talk with the movers and shakers that are redefining the future of commercial aviation. As usual, before we start, a quick reminder that all previous episodes of this podcast, as well as many other aviation stories, are available on the Allplane website. That's Allplane.tv, Allplane.tv. And now to today's show. For this episode, we are going to Latin America to speak with Felipe Varon, founder of the advanced air mobility startup of the same name, Varon. Varon aims to create an advanced air mobility ecosystem across Latin America, starting with its home country of Colombia. And why Latin America? Well, there are a few places in the world that hold as much promise for advanced air mobility as Latin America does. Crowded, congested, and sometimes dangerous cities, a general lack of land transport infrastructure, and often a very complicated terrain, like in Colombia, with lots of mountains and wide rivers. And well, we should mention as well some significant tourism potential, which is one of the top markets that Varon is looking into. So all of this makes of Latin America sort of an ideal region for the launch of eVTOLs, and that's where Varon comes into play. Felipe has several decades of experience in aviation. He was already involved with drone research as early as the late 90s, which makes him sort of a pioneer in this field. And he's got the chance to study in detail the opportunities and obstacles that eVTOLs face in the Latin American region. So Varon aims to build the eVTOL value chain from the ground up, including the vertiports. In fact, Varon defines itself as an infrastructure company, and all the way up to operating fleets of aircraft. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, and let me welcome Felipe to the podcast.
Hello, Felipe. How are you?
Hey, Mikael, how are you? Nice to be here with you.
Very well, and good to speak with you again. We had the chance to speak not long ago, and I had the chance to learn about your very interesting project in the field of advanced air mobility. So I thought it was a great idea to have you here on the podcast so that you can share with the audience a few details. Before we get into the actual technical stuff, tell us a bit more about yourself and your experience and your background. I think you've been working in aviation already for quite a few years.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yes, I've been working on the defense sector with military technology and unmanned systems for about 18 years. In the air domain, I've been working with unmanned aerial systems, both tactical and strategic, during all those years. But before that, I did start back in 1998 or 1999 with the idea of developing a new form of aircraft as an electrical engineering student. And what was developed then was this rigid platform that had 4 arms and had 4 motors on the ends of these arms and fixed propellers and an electronic brain to manage the flight and actually pilot this platform in the air. So that this might sound familiar. Those were eventually about a decade later or so. They were popularized as drones, and of course now they are a very mature industry today. And since then, it's been about 5 or 6 years that we've been working on our startup in Varon, where we're working on the same idea, but for people, to transport people, because the enabling technologies are there to make this happen for our transportation services and transportation needs in our cities and our regions and so on.
You already came up with the idea of what is now the unmanned air mobility in the late 90s. So that's already very pioneering. You're based in Latin America, right? You're originally from Colombia, am I right?
Correct. I'm originally from Colombia. That's right, yes.
Although Varon is incorporated in the United States, so let's say your field of action is not Colombia alone, but you are thinking about air mobility on a regional basis for the whole of Latin America, right?
That is correct, yes.
Basically, you were working on those projects, and then since 2016, you've been working on this project that you're leading now, Varon, and you define yourself as an infrastructure company. Can you tell us a bit more about this, about your vision? Because from what I understand, basically you are not, unlike other companies in this space, you are not developing a new aircraft, but you are basically looking more at the infrastructure and ecosystem side of things.
Yeah, so let me explain, yes, why we
Yeah.
came up with the definition of us and Varon being a disruptive mobility infrastructure company. And it has to do with the problem. You see, whenever we and people come in and look at advanced air mobility, we tend to think at first that this is about getting there faster. It's about flying over traffic, sort of like circumventing the problem of traffic. And of course, for a premium, an added piece of money, we can get there faster. We can get there much, much quicker than going through traffic. That's what we think at first, usually. But we've been on this for many years, and we've come to understand that that is not the problem that we're trying to solve. After many years of going over this, we've come to understand that traffic is just one symptom among many other symptoms of one underlying problem. And that underlying problem is the lack of proper mobility infrastructure. So mobility infrastructure, it does not have to do with infrastructure in aviation. Infrastructure in aviation refers to airports and heliports and systems and so on. But we're talking about mobility infrastructure. So let me explain. Mobility infrastructure, the traditional forms like train systems and metro systems and cable cars and road systems, those are the traditional forms of mobility infrastructure. They're all physical. You have to build railroads, you have to build the tracks, you have to dig tunnels, you have to throw asphalt, etc. What we've realized is that in Latin America and in the developing world, especially, there's a systematic incapability of governments to provide and maintain the proper mobility infrastructures to allow cities to grow and to allow for proper socioeconomic development. There's many reasons why our governments are systematically incapable. It has to do with lack of planning, with inherited problems, with corruption, lack of budgets, etc. But the reality and the end result is that there are many very close and nearby regions, geographically close regions in Latin America that are utterly disconnected. And that's why you see also, as a result, cities in Latin America being very, very small, but having some of the worst congestion problems in the planet. For instance, Bogota, the capital of Colombia, has been ranked #1 for 2 consecutive years already as having the worst congestion problems and traffic in the world.
Wow, I didn't know that.
These cities, yes, and these cities in Latin America are very, very small, probably not more than 20 miles across overall, the entire urban structures.
Quite big in terms of population, though. I mean, Bogota must be
very, very congested.
A few million people, right? And
absolutely, a few million people, Bogota,
yeah,
8 or 9.
And then you have, I mean, in places like Brazil, you have several cities that are, well, Sao Paulo, maybe it's like maybe 18 million or something like that. Mexico, 20 million or maybe more. I don't know, but yeah.
That's amazing. Right. And I was going to say that the urban sprawl situation in Latin America it's tremendous. There's no urban sprawl in Latin America, unlike the developed worlds, countries, the developed world in general. So we realized that was the underlying problem, and that traffic itself is just one symptom among many other symptoms in the different layers in the mobility problem, where we have very defectuous road systems. We have air quality problems. We have other layers that you do not see in the developed world, such as criminality layers. We have inaccessibility layers. So the overall mobility problem in Latin America is tremendous. It's so profound that it impacts socioeconomic development in a very, very clear manner. That is actually one of the bottlenecks for socioeconomic development, the lack of this proper mobility infrastructure. So here we come and we say, listen, we can take this new technology, all these new technologies in advanced air mobility, we can bring that legacy from aviation down to the micro world, And that legacy is the fact that we can generate connections without needing to build anything in between. So we don't need to throw asphalt or dig tunnels or build bridges to connect points and parts of regions, and someday connect parts and suburbs, and eventually generate connections inside cities, inside existing urban structures. And that's the legacy, that we do not have an associated cost per mile, unlike traditional forms of mobility infrastructure. And that's why we see ourselves as a mobility infrastructure company and not an aviation company. Mm-hmm. Advanced air mobility for us is a new form. It provides the potential to build a new form of mobility infrastructure that can target that problem, and we can tackle that situation of a lack of mobility infrastructure in our countries and regions in Latin America, and we can generate connections and provide one solution, not the solution, but one solution to that problem, and in that way contribute to socioeconomic development of our regions and countries by serving different markets and providing transportation services in different markets. So that's where the mobility infrastructure subject.
When you mention infrastructure, in practical terms, what are we talking about? Are we talking about the vertiports? Are we talking about air navigation, about charging stations, about all together, even thinking here about the actual operation of the air services? What's the scope of the project, and what parts of this value chain Varon is aiming to be involved in?
That's the main question, actually, and that's a great point. So the mobility infrastructure that we're developing involves the three main components of the operation. So it's the overall operation, the entire operation, with which we can set out to provide transportation services to both private and public customers. So the three components are, number one, our vertiports. We are developing and we intend to have Varon vertiports. Number two, it's our airspace architecture. We are developing the entire concept of operations, and that involves an airspace architecture, which is the equivalent to the train tracks in a metro system. So it's these virtual structures connecting our vertiports through the low altitude airspace over our regions, our suburbs, and someday over our cities. So these structures that are virtual, of course, they are not physical, connecting our vertiports. And number three, it's our fleet of aircraft. Our fleets of aircraft are going to be flying through that airspace architecture. The traffic will be orchestrated with the systems that make up the entire architecture. And with those aircraft, just like any airline, we'll have different types of aircraft depending on the business model, depending on the location where the operation is happening, and depending on the configuration that is required for the specific market. So it's three components: our vertiports, our airspace architecture, and our fleets of eVTOL aircraft, or electrical vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. Those three components and the overall operation, that's what we're calling a new form of mobility infrastructure.
In a way, it reminds me a little bit like the early days of railroads, where you had railroad companies that they actually build the tracks and they run the trains and
yes,
they run the stations. Let's say you open up like a network of vertiports. Are you envisaging this to be sort of like an exclusive infrastructure, or could be later open to other operators? Just saying this because I don't know how big it's going to be.
Obviously, well, we're going to start very small.
Yeah,
we have a big projection of being, of course, a large operator. But of course, our initial business models are in the tourism market. Because we've identified that to be the starting point, the point of entry for advanced air mobility in general. So these operations are going to be very, very local, very small, and very, very confined. There's many reasons for that. Also, the safety aspect of it and the regulatory aspect of it. So very small operations. Eventually, we intend to grow, of course. But to answer your question, there's a radical difference between what is being developed, or in general, how technology works in the developed world as compared to how they work in developing countries. So in developing countries, yes, it's the private sector that has the initiative. We have a private initiative, and we intend our operations to be completely private. These are small operations, local operations, initially in the tourism market. and they are going to be in their design and that are being developed and implemented as private operations, completely private. So the vertiports will be private. Our aerospace architecture systems involved there are going to be private. And of course, also the fleets of aircraft are going to be Varon as well, all private. Of course, complying with the new regulations that we are helping to develop by the authorities, civil aviation authorities, the entire operation is going to be private. So we intend to eventually also come up with private operations where we have a broader outreach to, for example, private customers. Like, for example, let's say a logistics company that needs to move cargo between warehouses. We can come to those companies and we're having these conversations, for example, where we can place vertiports in one warehouse and another vertiport at another warehouse and assign a fleet of aircraft to move cargo in a continuous conveyor belt system over the low altitude airspace, the low altitude skies for this private customer. Of course, with electric aircraft and all the benefits for the environment and what that means in cash flow for those customers by reducing and replacing the carbon footprint with electric vehicles. So there's an aspect of private operations in Varon, yes, unlike other initiatives that are being carried out in other parts of the world, yes.
In terms of aircraft, if I understand correctly, you haven't selected yet which aircraft are you planning to use. I've seen in your website some mentions to Jaunt, which is an eVTOL developer that we had here on the podcast just a few weeks ago. A pretty interesting project because it combines elements of rotorcraft and fixed-wing aircraft, unlike other designs that are out there. And that has a number of advantages. I mean, I invite everyone to go and check on that episode of the podcast which advantages. But have you selected any aircraft, or is Jaunt actually already selected as the initial aircraft? What's the situation?
Well, in fact, yes. We do work with partner OEMs. We do understand the growing and available market of eVTOL aircraft. And we have very, very deep partnerships with several OEMs, including Jaunt that you've mentioned, and we've made that public already. So yes, we have narrowed down the types of aircraft and the potential providers of those aircraft. Now, just like any airline, as I was saying, we're going to need to have different types of aircraft, depending on three factors that are the main ones. Number one, the market that we're serving, depending on whether it's a logistics customer or if it's a tourism customer, or if it's an eventual air taxi operation, etc. Number two, depending on the location. It's not the same to have a tourism operation in Panama City, which is at sea level, than to have the same tourism operation, for example, in Bogota, which is 2,600 meters above sea level. There's technical differences there. And number three, depending on the configuration that we require. So one thing, for example, is to have an air taxi configuration requirement for an X number, or for example, for 4 passengers, than to have a tourism aircraft that might require just 2 occupants on board. So the configuration, we might think about a logistics aircraft, for example, is going to be completely differently configured than a tourism aircraft. So those 3 factors determine which types of OEMs we're looking at and what types of models. So we do have several that we're partnered with and have been for several years and deeply discussing and sharing on the operational models and so on. So yes, now for the initial operations, you might know already from your previous conversations with other companies that and other OEMs that there's timelines for these aircraft.
Yeah.
The aircraft that are 4 to 5 occupants, they're going to come later in this decade, depending on different factors. There's several years away of being available to us, and that means not only built and tested but also certified, right? In order for aircraft to be, let's say, eligible for an operation anywhere in the civilized world, they have to have some type or an equivalent to an airworthiness certification. So that's the point of entry for any given model of aircraft. Now, what we do have right now and what is going to probably come first are the 1 and 2 occupant aircraft. Those are mostly or the ones that we are interested in are the multi-rotor type of aircraft, the powered lift types of aircraft. And currently, these 1 and 2 occupant aircraft are going to probably come first with those certifications. And that means that we're going to open the door first, very, very probably, and we are expecting it to be for the 1 to 2 occupant business model. And that's the tourism business model. So we think that those are going to come first, very probably, very, very soon.
Obviously, Latin America, it's a pretty big region of the world. I don't know if you have already identified specific countries or cities where you want to operate, particularly thinking now, you mentioned earlier the airspace utilization. I don't know what's the situation now in the region, if you've been already discussing with authorities, with the civil aviation authorities, how this is going to work. And yeah, so basically what points look more promising towards the start of a service and what time frame you're expecting?
So, oh yeah, absolutely. One of our strongest partnerships is with the civil aviation authorities. We do we're involved with the advanced air mobility work groups for NASA and the FAA. We also share with some other authorities and projects in the world, from Australia to different countries in Europe. But one of our main and strongest partnership is definitely with the Colombian Civil Aviation Authority. And we've been sharing with them and discussing about this project for many years. I want to say over 15 years, maybe
Wow.
even 20. So definitely, yes, this is something that is very strong with the Colombian Civil Aviation Authority. We've been working hand in hand with them. And there's, as of today, a very, very clear path. We've already started that path formally as well with the authorities in Colombia, where we've laid down the next steps and what comes and what will happen in terms of the new regulations. Both the new regulations that we need to create, that the authorities need to create, and we want to contribute to create to allow for these new forms of operations, and also to be able to fit our current operations, our initial operations, into the existing regulations. So those two things are happening, and they've been happening for quite some time already. Yes, absolutely. And in terms of time, what mostly defines the timeline for us is not the technical aspect. That part, let's say, is basically ready. Just like the business model is ready. That's been our focus of work for the past 5 or 6 years, coming up with the appropriate and viable business model. So that's sort of done and ready. Right now, it's a shared effort between the regulatory aspect, which is currently underway and being worked, as I say, and the capital raise. We currently have our seed round open. We've already started receiving investments in, and that's great for us, because that's what actually frames and will allow for us to start executing those initial implementations, those initial operations here in Colombia, in the city of Cartagena, which was chosen for the implementation of our initial operations, and hopefully we're expecting that to happen, and it's planned for 2023, but dependent, of course, on the capital raise mostly and the regulatory work that we're carrying out right now.
2023, that's like next year.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
pretty soon. And do you expect then to have eVTOLs flying by then? Because I don't think any of the eVTOLs currently under work is going to be ready by that early. Or you refer to actually starting to kind of set up the environment or the ecosystem for this to happen at a later date?
No. We have partner OEMs that have aircraft ready that will very, very probably in a very short time have airworthiness certifications. And those aircraft are already operating, they're already flying, and they're available to us. So yes, we're talking about having our initial operations, our first flights, hopefully in the year 23.
And then the Colombian authorities, you're expecting them to have approved that by then, I guess?
There's a difference. So you have to understand, and that's a great point to have a conversation about.
No, because I'm just not sure what are the tempos? Can the Colombian authority give approval before FAA, or do they need to wait for FAA to issue certain?
No. No, no. Remember, these are different countries. They're
Yeah.
autonomous organizations, and there's those are different jurisdictions.
Yeah.
The
But
Colombian and Peruvian and the Argentinian,
I,
the Panamanian. These are all different countries, and they're
yeah, I
all
know.
autonomous.
I know. But also like some authorities normally kind of follow what FAA does. So that's why I was just kind of thinking aloud now. Is like how is it? How does it work over there in Colombia? I don't know. I have no idea. So that's why I
So
was curious to know.
absolutely, and I think this is a great point of conversation. Like I said, so yes, these are all autonomous countries, and all these organizations are fully self-sufficient and autonomous in their decisions. But yes, many of them do follow regulatory bodies like the FAA or EASA. It depends, but definitely that's true. Now, what has evolved over the years in Colombia is the realization that the problem that we're trying to solve is so organic to countries like Colombia. It is so organic that they have understood that the authorities, the civil aviation authorities, are going to be instrumental in providing this regulatory body for one solution to that problem, as I was explaining. So, yes, they are clear in terms of paths forwards and the steps to follow autonomously to allow for these operations. So as I was saying, there's different steps in those operations. What we are expecting is to be able to have the first aircraft operating in year 23. Hopefully, that depends on many factors. One factor is capital raise. The other factor is, of course, OEM availability to manufacture and provide the aircraft. But as of now, that is the plan, depending on factors like those, to have these initial flights in Colombia in year 23. We'll see how those two things develop, especially capital raise in these controverted times, of course, for capital. That's one main bottleneck that we will all have in the world. But cash is there and funds are available and people have shown great interest. And like I said, we already started receiving money in the bank and investors in. So that's underway right now. And what we can expect is to have initial operations. Now, a different thing is to have commercial operations where we have paying customers flying. So that's a different question. There might be a process that we're expecting to need to walk through with the authorities in Colombia with our aircraft on operation. And who knows, that might take a bit more time to be able to say, to open doors to paying customers to come in and board our aircraft and pay for those adventure rides and sightseeing flights. So I hope that frames a bit better the timelines that we're expecting and what sort of layers and steps follow. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So you then the initial plan is to launch these tourism related services in Cartagena, which I imagine it's in and around the city.
No. Well,
Okay.
one of the main reasons why tourism is the lowest hanging fruit of all the different markets that we can eventually start servicing is that we can do these operations in unpopulated areas, in
Okay.
rural locations where we can abide with those expected security and safety aspects of the regulations that we're talking about. So, no, they're going to initially be in the outside. We'll be working in rural locations, in fields where it's unpopulated. And eventually, as we grow and mature and understand the KPIs and in general mature enough, will start coming in, both us and the regulatory bodies, the civil aviation authorities, will start allowing eventually operations in more populated areas like suburbs and someday inside cities. We're really far from that still.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then after Cartagena, what's going to be the next growth area?
Well, we have at least a dozen locations in Colombia where we can replicate that same business model in tourism, that same operation for adventure rides and sightseeing flights. We're talking about natural park visits, islands. We're talking Caribbean blue sea scenarios. So Colombia and Latin America in general, again, one of the reasons why we've chosen this region is because in tourism, there's everything to be done. In tourism, Colombia, for example, has so many locations throughout the entire country where we can offer these extremely attractive operations and offers of these adventure rides and sightseeing flights. So at least a dozen locations throughout the country.
Mm-hmm. What about the altitude? Because Colombia is a pretty mountainous country. You mentioned earlier Bogota is pretty high compared to many urban areas. Possibly one of the highest capital cities in the world.
Yes.
Does it affect the performance of eVTOLs in some way?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Anything powered lift, when it comes to Bogota, we will lose somewhere around 40% efficiency in the propellers and motors. So by all means, yes, it impacts their performance big time. That's why I say that part of the types of aircraft, the models that we choose need to depend or will depend on the location of the operation. Mm-hmm. So yes, there's definite impact on that side.
I haven't seen much about these factors in the news when
Oh yeah, we take those into account very seriously. We've done our research and we know the impact and that most of the operations today, mm-hmm. given the current state of technology, are operations at sea level for that reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Cartagena is also, I guess, at sea level or close to it.
Yes, right? Of course.
Yeah,
at sea level.
Mm-hmm. You are a private startup, right? You mentioned you are raising funds now.
Yes.
Yeah, and have you estimated how much capital is needed to basically to become a regional player that can be active in many different locations across Latin America, even Colombia, which is pretty big country?
Oh yeah, it's gonna be. I mean, we've had that question many times before. That's estimated. We don't have worked to the structure of it yet, but we do know that an estimate that to be somewhere in the few dozen $1 million for that regional operation, and that is part of our plan, our expansion plan to Latin America. We have conversations from Argentina to Peru and Ecuador to other very interesting countries like Panama, Costa Rica, and some others in the Caribbean. Mm-hmm. For tourism operations. So it's somewhere in that a few tens or dozens of millions of dollars. So unlike the same question in the developed countries like United States or in Europe, we would be in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Again, the lower overall cost of operation and implementation in Latin America because of labor costs and so on is another big reason why we've chosen to do this in Latin America and not in other parts of the world.
And what's the highest item here in terms of capex? Is it the vertiports? Is it the fleets that you plan to operate?
No. It's mostly it has to do with physical assets, of course. On the capex side, it has to do with OPEX as well. There's an operational expense part mm-hmm. of it that is quite heavy, but it does not involve the aircraft. Eventually, like any airline and everything in aviation, these aircraft are going to need to be acquired by a long-term lease or some sort of financial vehicles that don't involve capex. It's the only way that we can eventually make this mobility infrastructure mm-hmm. OPEX leaned and not capex, like traditional forms of mobility infrastructure where you need to throw asphalt and build tracks. That's heavily relying on capital expense. We need, in order to have an impact, our mobility infrastructure to be highly relying on operational expenses, and that means that the aircraft need to be acquired on lease vehicles or something equivalent.
And in this case, I guess there's an extra element here is that the technology is expected to evolve pretty quickly, I guess, in a matter of years. So I guess we can expect that the different generations of eVTOLs to be succeeding each other pretty quickly, more than commercial aircraft that for the last few decades pretty much have been just incrementally improving, but not like radically changing, right?
Yeah, we do expect, and we're seeing this explosion of OEMs and offers and designs and vehicles. It's happening, and the technologies will probably become quite incumbent. Just like drones, just like, the small commercial drones mm-hmm. are quite popular and common today. They did not used to be that way some 15 or 18 years ago. So, absolutely. We expect this to be the same case in the manned aircraft for our industry, and that is part of the expected massification of urban air mobility and of course regional mobility in general.
Yeah. Felipe, tell me a little bit about what's the reception you are getting in the investment community about these plans, about developing this network of advanced air mobility infrastructure in Latin America. What do people tell you? And I'm just curious about what's the general investor sentiment towards these type of ideas?
Well, I can give you just a very recent, I can share a very recent experience because we just opened our seed round only just a few months ago, and we've been talking with many, many very interested parties. We're mostly interested on angel investors at this moment, the type of people who understand this space. This is something that is not easy to understand for a newcomer. It's a concept that is currently being developed, so it is not an operational system just yet. So we are targeting to speak with people and angel investors who at least have some understanding of the technology or the aviation space or transportation or infrastructure in general. So in that space, we've had a tremendously positive reception. We are talking with very interesting people, and that's currently underway. So it's a very recent experience that I can only share.
In Colombia, in Latin America in general, where are you looking for this funding?
Well, we are a U.S. company, right? We are incorporated in Delaware. We are a United States company, and as such, we abide by the U.S. Laws and regulations, and that was made so that we could approach, among other things, so that we could approach the U.S. investment community. And we are talking to investors in the United States, European, and internationally in general. So the fact that we're implementing Latin America is a different thing. It's because of the opportunity that we see in the market that is there to develop. We do have some conversations with Latin American investors as well, of course, but we're mostly interested in the U.S. investment community.
And where do you see in this going later after the tourism market? What other markets do you see promising in Latin America? I mean, I'm asking this because I know, for example, for helicopters, some Latin American cities, like in Brazil, for example, because of many of the issues that you mentioned earlier, like security and insufficient infrastructure, traffic jams, etc., etc. So do you think this could be potentially advanced air mobility could replace helicopters in many of these missions?
So, well, the problem is true, but actually, maybe just two cities in Latin America are good markets for helicopters and have developed the helicopter industry, and it's Sao Paulo and Mexico City. The rest of Latin America, which shares the underlying problems, they're not good markets for helicopters. They're very, very niche in Latin America. And the reason is that
somehow I had this idea that Bogota might be also quite a big market, but maybe I'm wrong. No. Okay.
Yeah. There's hardly no helicopter transportation inside Bogota. Maybe some very, very niche operations, and it's the same for almost every other city in Latin America. Just Sao Paulo and Mexico City. And the reason for that is the cost. Simply the cost. The helicopter has proven, if you look at it from outside the box, from really, really outside the box, the helicopters have proven to be, great machines. We love them. We understand them, and we dream with these machines. But they've proven, and this is something very unpopular to say, but I think it's true, that they've proven not to be a good solution for humanity's needs. Humankind, and the actual needs that we have require a more massive, more approachable technology that allows for massification. That's where these new types of aircraft, the eVTOLs, come in because of the simplification. Something equivalent to what happens when you compare a regular car, an automobile, with an electric automobile, where you have the removal of many, many systems that make the vehicle simpler, not yet cheaper. We know that, but we're going to eventually get there. It's something very similar what happens with eVTOLs. We're removing in concept a tremendous amount of complexity from helicopters, hydraulic systems, pneumatic systems, mechanical systems, and so on, and converting all those into basically software complexities. These are computers taking over the flights of these machines. So a human being would probably not be able to pilot these machines, but these multi-rotors are being piloted by computers now. So it's software complexity. That does not necessarily make them cheaper yet, but again, we're gonna get there because the underlying nature of these aircraft is a simpler nature. All these aircraft are just electric motors, fixed propellers, and batteries with computers on board. That's it. They don't have any of those other complexities of the current fixed wings and especially the rotor wing type of aircraft that are tremendously complex. So we're expecting these aircraft to be more accessible because they're both their manufacturing costs, then their operational costs, and their maintenance costs. The maintenance, repair, and overhaul costs are going to need to be lower. So we're expecting these to be more approachable and the business models to be way, way more massifiable than those with helicopters. So yes, we're expecting to get there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to leave your other question, which are the markets. We've identified, Miguel, 8 markets that we can service with our mobility infrastructure in place, with the same mobility infrastructure. And they range from the later ones that are like agriculture markets and law enforcement and military government markets, and public transport, and air taxis, of course, which is probably going to be the last one of all because of the tremendous complexities in that, and we can dig into that if you wish. To other more simpler, easier to reach type of markets like the emergency response markets and logistic markets, and the lowest hanging fruit of all, which is tourism, the tourism market. So we've identified 8 markets where we believe that air taxi is the last one of all, and tourism is going to be the first one of all.
What about the electricity component? What's the landscape for renewable energy generation in Latin America? Thinking now about all the environmental footprint, because obviously eVTOLs, as they are electric, they are marketed as a greener alternative, but ultimately the electricity has to come from somewhere. I don't know what's the landscape right now, and how is the investment shaping renewable energy generation in Colombia and in Latin America more generally?
Well, so those of us who are working on new forms of mobility, we want to understand the bigger picture. We need to look at the bigger picture, and the bigger picture is something that in the automobile world is called the well-to-wheel effect. So it's not just looking at the vehicle itself, the automobile, which is the wheel part of it, but is looking at the entire chain, and that involves where the energy comes from. That's where the well, like an oil well, that's where do we get our fuel and our energy from. So it's the entire landscape. And yes, the energy side of it is tremendously important for us. In Varon, we have an energy director for that reason. It's a director who has a lot of experience and is really well known in the oil and gas and in the energy regulatory world. So it's because there's 2 aspects that we need to tackle. One of them is the acquisition of energy for us. We of course will have highly energy consuming vehicles that need to be charged. These batteries need to be charged, and these are powered lift aircraft. This means that they're highly inefficient, right? They don't have wings like these airfoils that make flights so efficient. Because of the nature of the markets that we need to serve, we need to have powered lift aircraft. So that lack of efficiency on the energy side of these powered lift aircraft is compensated by the value that the entire system brings to our markets. So the question of how to charge or where to charge from, where we're gonna get these energy sources from is tremendously important for us, and that's the first aspect. The other one is the carbon footprint. What sort of value we're offering our customers. And countries like Colombia are a tremendously positive environment where to work these 2 questions. On the first one, the energy source, Colombia has advanced a lot in new forms of alternative energy generation. For example, from hydrogen projects down to solar projects that are currently being developed today, and the potential as an equatorial country of having very, very good sources of energy on that on those sides. To the regulatory developments of how to be able to tackle the existing grids and profit from having energy assets and self-generating assets on our vertiports. So it's a very positive environment on the generation side. Another aspect is, for example, the hydroelectric aspect of Colombia. It's a very interesting thing. It's about, unlike the United States or countries like Japan, where just a very, very few percentage of the energy is produced with hydroelectric, which is considered to be a very clean source of energy. I think it's 3% or something in the United States. I'm not sure, but something on that vicinity. Colombia has somewhere around 70% of the energy on its grid produced by hydroelectric.
Wow, that's
so
quite
the
a lot.
the entire well-to-wheel aspect of it, the bigger picture, is very promising in countries like Colombia. Then we have the other aspect, the carbon footprint, the benefits that we're intending to offer our customers. We need to be able to offer value to our customers. Otherwise, we don't have a viable business model. And part of that value comes from the carbon footprint aspect of the value chain that we're offering. So it's not just getting there faster. It's not just flying boxes or people faster over traffic. It's about how do we replace trucks with internal combustion engines that produce greenhouse gas emissions and other pollutants like the PM3 and PM4s and so on, PM5 emissions that hamper the quality of air in countries like Colombia, for example. I don't know if you're aware, but we had confinements in Colombia in big major cities like Bogota, like Medellin, before the pandemic. The year before, 2019, there were confinements in our cities. The cities were closed because of poor air quality. And about 30% of the emissions come from mobility in general. Other percentages come from industry and so on. So how do we propose to our customers, like logistics companies, like tourism companies, like other private and public organizations, that we can replace those vehicles by way faster vehicles over the air, of course, and electric vehicles at the same time? And how does that new value in the carbon footprint reflect to our customers in cash flow efficiencies, in tax reductions? And Colombia, again, has quite an advanced regulatory aspect on that side as well. So as you can see, the entire environment on the electrical aspect for Varon is really important. We really pay attention to that. We have an entire branch of our startup dedicated to that aspect. And Colombia is a great environment where to see the effects of that. And again, that's another reason why we have chosen Colombia.
For people that want to learn more about what you guys are working on, maybe investors, maybe people that are interested in what's going on in this space in the region, for people interested in aviation in general, what sort of channels, resources would you suggest? I remember you show me you've been developing a sort of immersive kind of showroom where you're showing what you're working on, sort of metaverse type of thing. I don't know if that's publicly available yet, but I know you guys have been working quite a lot on showcasing this vision that you have for the region. So, where can people find out more about this?
That's exactly it. I appreciate the opportunity to tell your audience that anybody who is interested is welcome to not only visit our website, Varon.aero. We have everything right there at Varon.aero. You can get in touch with us and you can write us anytime, and we share and receive a lot of communications from people all the time. We have a lot of content at Varon.aero. And what you're talking about is our vision center. We have, in effect, we have developed an immersive 3D environment that anybody can visit from their computers at home. Any that they need is just a good computer with good speed and a good speed Wi-Fi communication or landline to the internet. And with those two things, you can have a very streamlined experience in our Vision Center. It's a 3D environment, immersive, where we have showcased uh, the latest in our development on the three components that I mentioned earlier, developments on our vertiports. You can visit our vertiports. You can go inside. You can see what we've designed in terms of the platforms, the insides, the architecture, etc. You can see content about our airspace architecture. You can watch simulations of aircraft flying through our airspace architecture and how we've envisioned these structures to exist in the low altitude skies over our regions and our cities someday. You can see a lot about also the our aircraft, our partners. You mentioned Jaunt. We're very strongly partnered with Jaunt. You can see the Jaunt journeys there, and you can also watch them live and close by. You can board one of these aircraft in 3D, so you can see them close by. There's content about our initial operations in Latin America and so on. So anybody who wants to visit our Vision Center is welcome to request that from us. It is not a public link, but anybody can just request that, and we continuously offer links for people to go in and visit our Vision Center. So thank you for the opportunity there, Miguel, for us to offer this to your good audience. And anybody and everybody is welcome anytime.
Well, thank you to you for spending time today, sharing all these insights about this very interesting vision that you have for your country and for your region more generally. So yeah, I'll definitely gonna be posting links to your website and to other things that we have been commenting here today on this episode, and hopefully we'll be able to see your project being rolled out in the coming months and years. 2023 is just around the corner, so we'll definitely keep an eye on it, and looking forward to see this aircraft flying soon in Cartagena.
Well, thank you very much, Miko, for that, and it's been a pleasure to share with you and your audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Speak soon. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Before you go, and if you like this podcast, a quick reminder that it would be absolutely great if you could please give it a rating on Apple, Spotify, or whichever platform you're using, or recommend it to a friend or whomever might be interested. Thank you very much, and see you soon.